some education experts, some of our contributors and columnists on the big issues that education is facing at the moment. If you missed last week, we spoke to Professor Tamsin Ford about child and adolescent mental health and the sort of experiences people might be going through at the moment, how to support them. And coming up this week, we've also got Jenny Devine, who's an Italian principal who's been in about 12 weeks of lockdown, and she'll be reflecting on that experience as well as looking forward to a return to something like normality in the next few weeks, hopefully. So if you want any more information on the schedule, you can go over to tes.com/Vodagogy. And if you want to ask questions to any of our guests coming up, you can go on Twitter, tweet us using the hashtag Tes Vodagogy. And that goes for today as well. If you want to ask any questions for our guests, you can either use the comment section below in this YouTube link or go over to Twitter. So that leads me to introduce my guest today. Carole Henderson is a grief specialist from Grief Recovery. She set up Grief Recovery back in 2010 following the sad death of her husband and some problems she had with her own grieving process. Hi, Carole. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Brilliant. So just, if you don't mind, that experience that you had going through the grieving process and your struggles with it, what was it about that led you to set up Grief Recovery?
I think because it was such a huge loss. Kevin, my husband, was 41 years old when he died. He died of skin cancer, which is normally very treatable, but wasn't because his was found so late. So he died of a very treatable cancer. I was only 40 years old. We had no kids. It was just me and him. So when I lost him, I lost everything. I'd also taken redundancy while I was caring for him. So I had no job, no husband, no kids, no pets at that point. I was completely on my own. So everything just changed, and it kind of hit me so overwhelmingly. I was in so much agony. It almost felt like I couldn't breathe. I was in that much pain initially. And I just knew I had to do something different to get myself moving and functioning again in some way. And so I started casting about for ways to help myself do that. And I came across the Grief Recovery Handbook entirely by chance. And I read it, and it was the first thing that made sense to me after Kevin had died. So he died in 2006. I found the book in 2007. So I followed the instructions in the book because Grief Recovery didn't exist in the UK then. It's an American creation. So I did it on my own, and I felt much better. And that's when I was inspired to think, well, maybe this ought to be in the UK. And I made contact with the Americans, and long story short, I am now a grief recovery specialist. I've been doing it for 10 years, and I've trained hundreds of other people to do the same work as a grief recovery trainer here in the UK.
Brilliant. So if you wouldn't mind, we had a quick chat last week, and I think I had a few misconceptions about grief itself. Yours, obviously, with the loss of a partner, is quite profound and sort of something everyone can understand, but there are different types of grief, aren't there? When we talk about grief, we can mean a multitude of things.
Absolutely. I always find it fascinating that we use the word love in many different contexts and don't even think twice about it. So I love my work, I love my job, I love my husband, I love my dogs, I love reading, don't love ironing. And we talk about love in all these different contexts, and no one worries about it. We understand that my love for my job is different from my love for my husband, because that's obvious. When we talk about grief, somehow it's come to mean somebody died, but actually we grieve all loss, and there are as many types of grief as there are types of love. You can grieve the loss of your job, you can grieve the loss of normality, which I think is where a lot of people are right now. You can also grieve loss of safety, loss of innocence, loss of trust, all these more intangible losses, as well as loss of a marriage. Any loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations is grief. And no, it's not the same, because that's like saying love for my husband and love for my dog is the same. They're completely different. One of them's more obedient than the other one.
Right. Another misconception I think I had was there's different stages to grief. Is that something that's Not quite,
The
right.
stages model. So the whole 5 stages idea was originally created by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross to describe the stages of dying, people who were terminally ill, and how they came to terms with that process. And it's kind of got adopted now into the stages of grief. Kubler-Ross never meant it to mean that you have to go through these rigid steps, but that's a lot of people's understanding. So we find it much easier to just help people understand that all grief is unique. You're a unique human, I'm a unique human, our experiences are unique. So all grief is as unique as your relationship with your mum is as completely different to my relationship with my mum. 4 individual human beings with completely unique relationships. So while there are a lot of similarities in people grieving, no 2 griefs are the same, and never are. And that's why stages and models never really work properly, because everybody's different.
Sure. So what role do you think schools and school staff should play in the grief process?
I think they're critical, absolutely critical, because I think in our current culture, the school is the extended family. And so it's that third space where for many children, it's their only safe space. For more children, it's a safe space where they can come and be themselves, maybe a different self to who they are at home, and separate from the interactions and the relationships that are going on at home. So if they're having a grieving time at home, school may be the only safe place that they've got to go and either escape that for a little while, or share their concerns and their fears with their peers and with school staff. I think we cannot underestimate just how important schools are in this whole thing.
I think for me, when I've tried to support people, perhaps I know they're going through a similar experience, there's always a bit of trepidation about overstepping the mark, not wanting to infringe on people's private lives perhaps, but what balance can school staff sort of strike in that department?
Well, here's the thing about grief. Because everyone's different, it's really hard to say if you do this, it'll work. And I think one thing I would say to everybody watching this is give yourself a break. You can't get it right 100% of the time. So even as a grief expert and someone that works in this every day, sometimes I'll say something you should catch someone wrong, because when you're grieving, you're incredibly sensitive. And something that might have been acceptable 5 minutes ago isn't acceptable right now, this second. So let's get that one out of the way. It's more important to say something and say the wrong thing, and then instead of running to the other side of the street and avoiding. When I've talked to grieving people, universally they say, please engage with us, talk to us, don't ignore us for fear of saying the wrong thing. And then the next thing I would say is, tell the truth about yourself. I have no idea what to say. I have no idea what to do. Help me help you. How do you want to be helped? And that old expression of I treat others how I'd like to be treated, I don't agree with. I try and treat people how they'd like to be treated, which may be very different to me. So tell the truth about yourself and then ask. Get it from the source, not from me.
Okay, thanks. So we talked about different types of grief. If someone has experienced a death, perhaps of a loved one or someone close to them during this pandemic, because of the pandemic, so that's going to be quite different to just use inverted commas, but a normal death. Perhaps you're going to be exposed to things that will remind you of the issues surrounding death constantly. Is there something that teachers can do and can be aware of in that respect, and be sensitive to those students?
When we're talking about bereavement, particularly maybe if a parent's been died or grandparents died, or possibly even a sibling, we're talking major loss. There's a number of things to think about here. One, make sure that you yourself are in a good place. It's a good place to start. We've got a 5-point plan to help yourself, kind of like emotional first aid type response. Have a look at that on our website. The link will be below. Also, have a read of the Grief Recovery Handbook, because it is actually written as a self-help book. So you can get help from our specialists, but it's a great way to make sure that you yourself are in a good place, but also It will start to help you understand how grievers are thinking and acting so you can better interact with others. And for the young people, we've got a bit called When Children Grieve as well. But what I would say is always be emotionally honest and always check in, because it's constantly going to be changing. So if a young person has said to you, I don't want to talk about it, that may be true at that particular time. But just keep checking in. How are things with you right now? Don't ask them how they are, because that's an impossible question to answer. But just say, what's going on with you, or how are things with you right now? And if you make it right now or this morning, it just makes the question much easier to answer, because we've brought it right the way down from this big, how are you? Although I don't know how to answer that, to right now, I'm really sad, or right now, I'm okay, or right now, I don't want to talk to you. And make it okay that they can say that, and that's fine. And also think about having safe places where the kids can go to openly share their feelings without fear of being told, don't cry, or be strong, or any other myths that people kind of come out with at this time, because they don't know what else to say.
I guess that it's interesting you mentioned that sort of safe space at the moment, because there's the sort of the classroom environment for a lot of children isn't there anymore, and they might see that as a safe space. Does anything change in this sort of digital world as we're supporting students?
I guess when we're talking to our students, whether it's on the phone or like this, again, it's just checking, are they in a safe place to talk right now, before actually asking them any questions, because they may well be, you may not be able to see, but they may well be sharing a room with lots of other people that they wouldn't be safe in front of to talk. So it's much more difficult, I agree, to be able to have those sorts of conversations when there's a fear of interruption. But it's important to regularly engage, keep the conversation flowing so they know they're not alone. That's a really important thing. Don't let anyone grieve alone. We as humans do much better when we're around others.
And for the incidents of grief that aren't so clear, perhaps like you mentioned, students are grieving a loss of normality. How can staff identify perhaps students who are struggling when they might not be ready to talk about it yet?
Well, the interestingly, the symptoms of grief are the same no matter what the cause of the loss. You might just see them in different degrees. So a really common symptom is reduced ability to concentrate. So if you know that student's generally pretty good at being able to do their reading, it's pretty engaged, but obviously they're having lapses of concentration, recognise that is a really, really common grief symptom, as is interrupted sleep, as is irritability, acting out, all those things that you would see when in other situations where they're under stress. That is a grieving symptom. Another one might be plummeting performance, or just not showing up, or otherwise they were really good attending, whether that's virtually or as we go back, actually getting to school face to face. So it's looking for those little changes. And this is why the regular teachers who know their kids, know those children, will be able to say, oh, maybe they've suddenly got really loud and chatty. And maybe that's the brave front that they're putting on. Or maybe this child's gone withdrawn and they were always the loud chatty one. So it is looking for those changes, and those are the symptoms that there may be some grief and loss going on.
Are there any, does that sort of change across age groups, for example? You know, like if you were dealing with a primary school child perhaps, or a teenager, are there different kind of signs we should be looking out for, different processes?
The symptoms would be similar. How they show themselves might be a bit different. Some people might argue it's harder to tell if a teenager's more irritable than normal. The behaviours are the same. It's acting out. So it might be going to the room and slamming the door, or it might be having a tantrum, and either of those can happen at any age, even with adults. So it is just recognising when the behaviours change, and you know that young person or that child or that adult in your life, they're not themselves, that they're displaying this reduced ability to concentrate, increased irritability, They say they're not sleeping very well, waking up at 3 in the morning. All classic grief symptoms. Okay. So then asking the question, is there something you're feeling uncomfortable about right now, or anxious about right now, or sad about right now? Please tell me about it. And then shut up. And it's the shutting up and listening to the answer that comes hardest for many of us. And it really is, we use the analogy of imagine yourself as being a heart with ears. So no mouth, just big ears, and look them in the eye and say, please tell me about it. And you can't fix it. That's the other thing. So you can't say everything's going to be okay, because that would be a lie. I remember back, I told earlier, I said, tell the truth about yourself. That's a lie. We don't know everything's going to be okay. What you can do is say, we're going to do everything we can to help us be safe. And what safe might be physical safety. At the moment, it might be emotionally safe right now. So versions of that, telling the truth about yourself, and then just let them talk. If they're willing to talk, let them talk, and keep that it.
Yeah, that's a good point about not being able to fix things, because, you know, school staff and teachers, they're not therapists at the end of the day. They've, you know, got a huge amount on their plate already.
Exactly.
Yeah, is that a key thing to remember in this experience?
And here's the thing, I'm not a therapist either, I'm an educator. So the Grief Recovery Method is an educational program. So yeah, there are some situations where it's going to be, let's refer so-and-so to the school counsellor, absolutely. But you're the one that's going to be spending hours with that child or young person. So it's just equipping yourself with some of the things to know and say, which is why we created all these free tip sheets that people can download and use on what not to say, which is the one everyone panics about. I always suggest reading the what to say last, so that's the one that stays in your head rather than going around don't mention the war. Start with the what not to say stuff, read the what to say stuff. And just be aware that things can pop out at random. I remember hearing from someone that a teacher, she was in a classroom, and one of her students just suddenly announced, my mummy's in a freezer, being that mummy had actually been taken away. Mummy had died and was in the morgue. And so from somewhere, this, my mummy's in a freezer, and the class all go, and it's having something on hand to know what to do in that particular situation, which is acknowledge it, handle it, and then move on. Don't try to just ignore it. You have to acknowledge the comment. You can't fix it. You can't correct it. You just have to acknowledge it and go from there. And so, yeah, equip yourself with some useful information, which is why we've made it freely available.
Brilliant. Yeah, we'll include a link to those resources in the description of this video afterwards, so you'll be able to find those. I guess staff out there probably now starting perhaps optimistically to think about going back into the classroom. Could that itself bring in another sort of form of grief for some students?
Absolutely. The grief recovery definition of grief is conflicting feelings following a change or end in a familiar pattern of behaviour, which is why when we first went into lockdown and everything was different, we had this huge grieving response and everything stopped and everything was different. Now this has been going on for so long, and if you think about how long this number of weeks is, particularly in a child's life, I don't know if about you, but I think most people talk about the summer holidays when they were a child went on forever. And they'll have been off longer, probably, than a normal summer holiday. So by the time they go back to school, conflicting feelings following a change or end in a familiar pattern of behaviour. They've got a new normal now. So they had a grieving event when they stopped school. They're going to have a grieving event when they go back to school. So that first day and week back is crucial. It's probably going to be like first day of a new school year with knobs on, because there's going to be so many people and so many emotions flying around in so many different places that it's crucial that we gear up for taking this extra emotional load on when we're bringing it back, as well as the educational gaps, you know, kids have done different amounts at different speeds, and finding out where they're all at. And I know you've got another expert lined up to talk about that, which
nicely plugged, thank you.
It's so important. I mean, I've got quite a few teachers who have done the grief recovery specialist training. So, and they are telling me about all the challenges they're already facing. And we're already hearing from people where they've got students in their schools where parents have died from this awful disease. So the response needs to be whole school response as well. It's not the head's job, it's not a teacher's job, it's every single person in the school that makes that tick, from the caretaker, any grounds people, the dinner ladies. Everyone needs to be on board in taking this whole school approach to making everyone feel comfortable and safe to be back at school into this new normal. And it still might look strange because we're talking about phased openings and all this kind of thing. And then you've got these kids that were already in school all the time because their parents are key workers. It would be a very different place emotionally, maybe scared because they're now scared of being exposed to infection again if they've heard some talk of this. So there's going to be quite big emotions running high. So quite a lot of patience, and remember that reduced ability to concentrate thing. So nothing too onerous when they first go back. Let them settle down and get over the shock and numbness of this grieving experience, because that very first initial reaction to the loss is almost always a kind of numbness, woolly brain, can't think straight. And if you think back to those first few days of lockdown, it was fascinating. Even my website, which you think many people would turn to given our topic area, it just stopped. We didn't get any traffic, we didn't get any book orders, everything just, the phone stopped ringing, everything stopped for a couple of weeks while everyone kind of assimilated what was going on in the world. And this is adults. So when we change again, no matter what age, we're still going to have this, oh, I can go outside, I don't know if I want to, for many people. And equally, there'll be people that can't wait to get out and socialise and want to be close to people or don't want to be close because they're still scared. And there's going to be an awful lot of interesting and challenging life stuff going on for the next few months to come.
Yeah, sure, of course. So if you're, for leaders and teachers watching this, are there any things that they could sort of practically implement as schools reopen in terms of sort of mentoring for pupils who might be struggling particularly? Are there any techniques that you've seen implemented that might be successful here?
Again, I think it's back to planning, particularly communication with parents, particularly if the child has been bereaved. Then there needs to be really regular and clear communication with the parents, and this needs to be in partnership. So back to that everybody's different thing. The frequency of that should depend on the parent and the child, so that needs to become to some kind of agreement. Then recognise that it's not only the bereaved children that are grieving, so there may well be other difficult circumstances going on. So you need to have really good comms with parents, so you've got an idea of where they're going to be at before they come back, so that you can make your plan accordingly when they do come back. And after that, it's remembering about listening, not fixing, and bringing in some fun stuff as well to make sure that school is fun, because let's liken it to homesickness. You know, maybe you've been away for a long time doing something you quite enjoy, but actually it'd be really nice to be at home and back in my own bed, and you're actually really looking forward to getting home, and then you travel home and you get home and then it's home. So yes, it's your own bed, but you know, the wallpapering needs doing, washing needs doing. And so when you're back to school, those kids that have maybe missed school because that's where all their friends are, and they miss their favourite teachers, and they've missed all that, then they get back and bang, it's reality that we have to be here all day and we have to come back again tomorrow. And so there's that, again, there's that conflict in feelings. So take that into account as well. Maybe plan some good activities that get everybody engaged with each other and thinking, yes, this is a good place to be back, and I'm really glad to be back.
Nice. I've just got a question come in here from Miss Duffy on YouTube. She's asked, what would you suggest when talking to younger pupils who are struggling to understand what they're feeling? So, you know, perhaps some children might not realise that they're grieving at this point. Is that something you could advise on?
Yeah, so again, it's think about examples from yourself so you can kind of, as leader, go first. So, for example, when you're having a conversation, I remember when I was feeling really sad after my grandfather died, if this is true for you, that it gave me a tummy ache. And I got a bit of a headache as well as feeling really sad. So it's quite normal to have physical feelings when we're not very happy. Does that sound like something that you're having? And so for you, sounds like, then they can kind of correct you without saying, no, you're wrong, miss. So you can throw out some examples of, I remember when Johnny was sad, he wanted to cry all that time. Does that sound like something that you feel like doing? So again, it's saying other people have done this and it was okay. Does that sound like something about you? So you can kind of give them some comparison, particularly when they're, maybe they haven't got the vocabulary to explain what they're feeling, and you'll know the language to use with the children that you work with. So it is leader goes first, telling the truth about yourself and using those feeling words yourself so that they can kind of, yes, they understand it, but they may not be able to find that word themselves. So you can kind of chuck some out there for them to pick up and run with if they feel like it.
Right, brilliant. I've got another question in here from Maisie Johnson. She's asked if you have any tips on supporting students with SEN, with grief and bereavement.
I think it's the same answer in that everyone is unique. And so we have to use the right language. We maybe have to take it at a different pace, but you know the people that you work with. And the interesting thing is, although I'm talking to kids and young people, all the advice I give is the same whether we're talking about adults, vulnerable adults, people with educational needs. Everyone's heart works in a very similar way. The only difference is how we maybe express that. So maybe be more aware of hidden grief symptoms, and that there may be physiological grief symptoms such as pain, as well as the unexplained pain, increased heart rate. The number of people I've heard say, I went to the doctor, thought I was having a heart attack, and it's actually all the overwhelming feelings. It makes your heart feel like it's racing, that you're going to have a heart attack and it's fine. So knowing that that's normal is really helpful, and being able to explain that that's normal can be really helpful. But just also be aware, equally, it could still be a heart attack. So we have to take all that into account. But yeah, just you know that person you work with. The tips that we give out will still work. You just need to adjust it into the vocabulary with that student.
I think you mentioned a 5-point scale at the start of our conversation.
Yes.
Yeah. So Rachel Compton, thanks Rachel, has pointed out. Could you signpost us to that, or go into a little bit more detail?
Yeah, absolutely. Essentially, it's 5 steps to looking after yourself during lockdown. If you go to the homepage of our website, which I know you're putting the website in the links afterwards, you can download the ebook, A 5-Point Plan. So essentially, it's about being present. It's about acknowledging everything that's going on, instead of trying to hide from it. And it's learning how to say goodbye to the stuff that's not serving us. So that's in a teeny tiny nutshell. You can download the ebook, full details, completely free. And we've also got all the items. If you don't want to download anything, it's there on the blog as well.
Brilliant. Thank you. I've had one more question in from Twitter. What about children who've previously suffered bereavement, who might have some of these old emotions brought to the surface again because of COVID-19? How can we help them?
Well, grief is cumulative. And that's why sometimes someone who's been going along completely fine up until now, one more, what might seem inconsequential loss, such as the loss of an exercise book, could kind of tip them over the edge. So some people talk about triggering. I think about grief layering on top. So when that next layer comes on top, that can spill into the reaction, create this pressure cooker moment. So if you think about all these feelings that have been building up over time and there's nowhere for them to go, it'd be like there's a pressure cooker inside, and then something has to give. And it might be a temper tantrum. It might be acting out. It might be taking a substance. It might be eating food. It might be, I need to do something with this feeling and I'm trying to do something about it. So look out for what we call these short-term energy relieving behaviors, these sudden behavior changes that go, there's something going on. When we lose our hopes, dreams and expectations, then we experience grief. So there's a new layer on top. Again, it's listen, ask gentle questions, tell the truth about yourself emotionally, and shut up and listen to what they have to say.
Great. Another question in from Twitter. Should teachers rather wait until students are back in school so they can help them face to face rather than trying to help over the phone? Do you think that's a constructive way to go about things?
I'm going to say it depends. And it's going to depend on the student. It's going to depend on the ages of the student. It's going to depend on your relationship with the student. But I think doing some preparation work before they go back is going to be helpful overall.
Okay.
So making that connection, I think, would generally be a good idea.
Brilliant. Okay. Thanks, Carole.
You're welcome.
I think that's all the questions from the audience, and that pretty much wraps things up from my point of view. As I said, we'll signpost you to all of Carole's resources in the comments under this video, so you'll be able to find those. Carole, thank you very much for joining me. That's really, really useful. I'm sure a lot of teachers out there feel a lot more reassured having listened to that.
I hope so. And as I said, we are adding more all the time. So any way we can help, if anyone's got ideas, they can always email us and say, we'd like this, please, and we'll try and make it happen.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Okay, as I mentioned, coming up later this week, we've got Jenny Devine, who's working out in northern Italy, one of the places that's been sort of hardest hit by the virus. So she's going to be reflecting on her time in isolation and looking to a return to the classroom. If you need the full schedule, go to tes.com/Vodagogy. And as I mentioned, any questions you've got for any of our guests, get on Twitter, use the hashtag Tes Vodagogy, and we'll put those to our guests. Till Thursday, thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Mm-hmm.